Dear friends and fellow progressives, welcome to Berlin.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Good morning. Welcome here. Welcome to the Progressive Governance Summit 2024. Welcome at the representation of Baden-Württemberg. Welcome to all of you who watch us online and live stream. This is the 25th conference already. In this series. My name is Maria Skóra, and I will be your host today and tomorrow. And this year's conference is called Progressive Security, Championing Challenge in Times of Uncertainty. And I would like to hand over to Florian Ranft, who is the mastermind behind the program this year, to introduce the conference and for welcoming remarks. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, and also obviously a very warm welcome from my side. It's really good to see all of you here. My name is Florian Ranft. I'm the head of progressive governance at das Progressive Zentrum, and this is a day that I've been looking forward to for nearly a year and a half now, since we closed the last conference. And I just want to say a very special and warm welcome, obviously, to all those guests today who have traveled from abroad and far away, and willkommen in Berlin. Welcome in Berlin. So it's PGS time again, 2 days packed of conferences. We got 25 sessions and more than 100 speakers. And as Maria just mentioned, it's an anniversary edition, 25 years. So the progressive governance conferences have been around for a while. And one thing that hasn't changed in these 25 years is the initial idea of progressive governance, which is finding common solutions to common problems. And more so, considering the consolidation of right-wing parties in the European elections and the softening of the dividing lines between the far right and the center right, this must come as a wake-up call for progressives. So it's really good that we all gather here together, and that it's not just the Berliners, but also everyone else coming from Europe and North America. At the core of progressive governance stands the notion of building political alliances between social democrats, between Greens, between liberals, and between the left. And we believe that this is a key factor of driving economic, ecological, and social change in our societies. And progressives are shared or have a common understanding in the view that the best years lie ahead of us and not behind. So a necessary condition for both finding common solutions and building alliances is to develop a common understanding of the challenges that are at stake, and that's why we are here today, to listen to each other and to learn from each other. So we feel extremely humbled that on the way to PGS, which has been a few months, you can believe me, we've been working with more than 25 international partner organizations, which represent these different shades of progressivism. And I just want to say a very warm thank you to those who have helped us in bringing this together once again. And a very warm thank you also to the Landesvertretung Baden-Württemberg, which is hosting us today. It's a great venue, and I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful time. Now to the more serious stuff. So we're coming together, as you all know, just a couple of weeks after the European elections, and an election that threw light and shadow on the progressive parties across Europe. And we learned from our colleague Paul Hilder last night, who will be with us throughout these 2 days, that it was a good night for the populist right, especially the results in Germany and France helped to drive the narrative that it was a success for the far right. The center-right had mixed results. The Social Democrats largely held ground across Europe, not so much here in Berlin and Germany. And the Greens and Liberals were suffering all across Europe. But progressives also exceeded expectations in a number of countries, for instance, in the Scandinavian countries, in the Netherlands, but also in Italy. And the issues that concerned voters are kind of telling for the time that we're living in, a time which is dominated by economic uncertainty and new geopolitics, and obviously also international conflicts, and the impact all of this has on our societies. So what concerned voters in these elections were the general state of the economy, the cost of living crisis, immigration, and not surprisingly, security and defense, and stopping extremism. And these issues kind of provide us with a first explanation as to why various parts of the extended progressive family are grappling with something that we might call the epidemic of insecurity. And coming to terms with this and understanding the underlying causes, which are going to be a part of the conversations that we are having, the question that we ask ourselves is, how can the provision of security be linked to progress, and how can we build on this in coming up with good policies, narrative, and strategies for progressives? This is why we have chosen progressive security as this year's theme. And on the way to spelling out the theme and providing a kind of framework, we had the pleasure to work with a lot of very close colleagues, and two of them are here today, who have helped us writing the conference paper, the summit paper. So feel free to download it and scan through it, read it, and digest it. And we have with us Jeremy Cliffe and Cathryn Clüver Ashbrook, who will explain to us what progressive security might mean, and will provide the frame for the discussions at the summit. And I would like to invite you to come to the stage, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Florian. Thank you to the organizers of this summit. And thank you also for the chance to try, at least, and frame some of the conversations that we'll be having over the next 36 hours. And indeed, the chance to work on the summit paper, which, if you haven't already seen, you can find on the summit website. Our starting point is the incontrovertible fact that we live in highly insecure times. Wars rage in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, and elsewhere. Our geopolitical order is in flux, and even the future of the transatlantic relationship is in fresh doubt. The climate crisis is accelerating. Last year was the hottest on record by some margin. And then there are the other crises of an interconnected world: out-of-control technology, financial shocks, pandemics, the threat of terrorism. And these are matched in the insecurity, I think, that people feel in their everyday lives. Supply chain shocks and inflation make housing, energy, food less secure. Violence and the fear of violence, as well as social and political polarization, are further causes. And we should also remember that security is also tied up with people's sense of their social standing, their worth and belonging. And there, too, people feel under strain. So you have these global, local, and personal drivers of insecurity that are sometimes said to add up to a polycrisis. And you see that in polling across our societies, and you see it in the results of elections, most recently the European Parliament elections, as Florian has mentioned. I think it's no underestimate to say it's the political challenge of our time. And so I'm very grateful to Das Progressive Zentrum for inviting me to co-author the conference paper with Florian. Particularly as initially I did fear that this might end up being an exercise in nailing down a compromise between progressive values on the one hand and an innately conservative subject, security, on the other. And I'm very glad that what we've been able to produce is something more assertive, more confident, that makes the case that progressives have just as much of a claim to the politics of security as conservatives do, and in many respects more of one. It is for them to claim. Let me also take the opportunity, as I'm mentioning the paper, to thank Cathryn and Anke Hassel for their input, as well as that of the wider Scientific Council of DPZ. So thank you for that. Now, let me be clear. What this is not saying is that conservatives are fundamentally incapable of providing security, or that there is no overlap between what we call conservative security on the one side and progressive security on the other. But it is to say that there is a robust, progressive security agenda around which the different parts of the progressive political family can rally in ways that are mutually reinforcing and clearly distinctive. And we give some examples in the paper of progressives both in government and in opposition doing just that. We divide progressive security into three main pillars: security as cooperation, security as cohesion, and security as capacity. And I'm going to briefly talk through those before I hand over to Cathryn. Pillar one, security as cooperation. In dangerous times, it's always very tempting as individuals, as parts of a society, or as countries to pull up the drawbridge. So progressives can now remake the case for pragmatic but ambitious cooperation in ways that conservatives, wedded to established structures of wealth and power, and certainly not nativist populists, are incapable of doing. Why is this so important? Well, number one, because the threats to people's security are increasingly international and so require international solutions, but also because we so clearly need a new fusion of the values of multilateralism, human rights, global justice, with the hard-nosed reality that we are in a time that demands hard power and a more steely geopolitics. And the British Labour Party's Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has captured this quite well, I think at least, in his refrain, progressive realism. Pillar two, security as cohesion. Polarized, unequal, polarized, unequal, them and us societies are not just less well equipped to deal with insecurity, they are themselves a cause of it. Ample academic research has shown that more unequal societies are more prone to mental health problems, drug abuse, violence, criminality, and they also have lower social trust, which affects people's subjective sense of their own security. Cohesive societies are more secure in these internal respects, but also in external ones, as better multilateralists, more robust defenders of alliance interests. As the old adage goes, foreign policy begins at home. Pillar three, security as capacity. The last years have been a real education in the folly of putting short-term efficiency above all else. Sure, you can cut your state to the bone, you can establish fragile, just-in-time supply chains, you can outsource your energy needs to autocrats, but when war comes to your neighborhood, your military is not up to it. Your energy is insecure. When the pandemic strikes, you don't have enough hospital beds. When supplies are disrupted, prices surge in ways that cause pain for ordinary people. Now, progressives are leading a reappraisal of the balance between efficiency and resilience, and making the case for more strategic and capable states and markets. So those are those three pillars of progressive security. And in the paper, Florian and I argue that they reinforce each other in all sorts of ways. But if you were just to read one part of the paper, I'd urge you to go to part 3, which is where we talk about the tensions, the challenges, and the questions, because it's meant as the start of a conversation, not the end of one, an impulse and not a manifesto. And that's really the job before all of us here at the Progressive Governance Summit to engage with. Questions such as, what are the benefits of this forceful claim to security on the part of progressives, but also what are the possible drawbacks? What are the root causes of the prevailing sense of insecurity? What have we missed? On cooperation, how do you pursue more ambitious multilateral cooperation and international engagement against a backdrop of anxiety at home? On cohesion, how do you deepen people's sense of belonging and shared interests at a time of such rapid flux demanding such drastic adaptation? And on capacity, how do you build a more capable and strategic state, making the necessary investments in climate and defense without slashing the social safety net? There are many more of these sorts of questions and challenges in the paper. I urge you to take a look. And I just reiterate, it's a blueprint. It's not a blueprint. It's a first draft. So it's our job to flesh it out. And I'm going to hand over to Cathryn to begin doing that. So over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well, first of all, this is your applause and Florian's applause, because when people ask me why am I up here, it's because we, the scientific committee of the Progressives Zentrum, we were the needling voices in both of their heads for the past couple of weeks. And so I'm here to build a bridge between what we tried to do with the paper and what we're all going to do for the next 2 days. Because as Jeremy has pointed out, all the framing questions he's given you, if you look at the program over the next 2 days, that is what we're trying to test for. And you heard from Florian this idea of learning, this idea of an atrophy of trust, the idea of what happens when you bring different layers and levers of decision-making into a space to begin to challenge the status quo. And I think that is the subtext of the paper. But in the process of getting to the paper, we had a couple of points of challenge, and I wanted to bring those up too, because I think those will help inspire our conversations over the next 2 days. So cooperation, cohesion, capacity. Well, I'm the daughter of a historian, I'm a political scientist, and those three frames, we've been there before. Who pioneered thinking along those three C's in the most vocal way in a moment of time of epochal change? One of the greatest progressives of all time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And if you go back exactly 84 years to FDR's Land speech, which is the seminal speech in which he took the idea of the arsenal of democracy into the idea that safety at home, safety in the sense of the four freedoms, and I'll give you again FDR's ideas of the four freedoms, right? It was freedom of speech, freedom to worship, now we might think freedom to live plurality, the full plurality of democracy, whatever that may be, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Does that sound like something that seems resonant to today's desire for our democracies? They have to assure the fact that we have the expanding right of the franchise, the inclusion that our societies promise, but they have to deliver on the things that Jeremy pointed out, which is to say economic prosperity and physical security. And I think we can all agree that to different degrees, our democracies are falling down on that premise and on that promise fundamentally. But FDR also had this idea that, again, to your point about security stopping at the water's edge, that it's not a question of defense, that you are only as secure as your society at home is safe. Because, again, what was happening in 41 and 42? There was massive propaganda undercutting the cohesiveness of American society. There was a threat that was so palpably felt that in order to orchestrate these changes, what did FDR expect of American society? Sustained sacrifice. And so what are the trade-offs that Jeremy has just pointed out? Because certainly there have to be trade-offs in creating resilient democracies that are able to do what we are faced with now, which is to say these sort of set of interconnected problems, but supersized, three-dimensional, right? They are lived because we have undergone failures as joint democratic societies over these past 80 years. We have let ourselves slip away from the three C's. And we have done so to feed national interest, to feed power, to bring impunity, and to bear on our multilateral architecture and our systems. And before I just reflect briefly on that hinge point and where we go from here and where we go from here over the next 2 days and begin that discussion with you from this stage, because that's what Jeremy and I are also here for you to needle us, I want to just share this FDR quote with you. He said in his Land speech, in March 1941, I would ask no one to defend democracy, which in turn would not defend everyone in the nation against want and privation. The strength of this nation shall not be diluted by the failure of the government to protect the economic well-being of its citizens. And that's exactly that cusp moment at which we find ourselves. And what did we do after World War II? We did the 3 Cs. We did cooperation. We built an entire multilateral architecture, including the European Union, with an undergirding of the rule of law that we are now continually falling down on, that we violated over the globalization of greed, the deregulation of our economies. We let ourselves be pulled into something that failed to change the way we operate in that kind of cooperative system, right? We went in seeingly, knowingly. We deregulated our markets. We let the guns and butter scissors open up. We also let the differences between, we let our tax systems not provide equality. We let wealth get entirely out of hand, both in the United States and here, and elsewhere around the democratic world. So we injured the 3 Cs with another C, which is fundamentally complacency. We've become complacent. The short version of it is fat and happy. And we're really unwilling to let go of the idea of fat and happy, right? But we have to. And what part of this summit is designed to do is to remind ourselves that solutions, Florian mentioned, the party political environment in which we operate. But you know what? Parties are not where the answers necessarily come from. So long have we failed to listen to our citizens, and John Austin is here, and he'll do a piece on industrial heartlands, where the pain is. We are asking change of our citizens, not at a pace they can handle, but at a pace that is so three-dimensional because we have failed them. We have failed them I was just at a conference where somebody said, oh, well, between demographic change and aging, Merkel chose aging. So here we are. 20 years ago, we talked about demographic change, and here we are. You can put this on the infrastructure system. You can put this on digitalization. We chose not to deal with the medium-term complex problems because they were hard. And because we did not have the kind of infrastructure and the kind of conversations that we need when you have a multiplicity of changes that's effectively three-dimensional, right? The 3 Ds that progressives initially thought would help in dealing with the international surround, defense, diplomacy, development, we effectively cut all 3, and especially those last 2, right? Those are the budget conversations we're having right now just down the street. And then we added to that legitimated dysfunction within our societies. So I give you, what is our work today? Is to get closer to where change can be affected, where trust can be measured, where trust can be restored. We're, again, in radical conversation. So I would add 1 C to the work that we have to do today and beyond these rooms. Radical creativity. Who are the seismographs of the change that we feel among our employees, among our societies, among the shifts, the tectonic shifts internally that, again, make us weak and vulnerable to the outside? The Chinese have a strategy to pick off our cities one by one. Shanghai has 300 people working for the city of Shanghai that is out there doing exploratory work to remake the urban environment of the entire world in the Chinese face. Do we have that? Are our cities confronted with those same challenges? Do they have somebody to call when major disruptive interventions come in, data packages are promised, data gets sent home to Beijing? Do they have someone to call? Is there an interlocution, an interface in which cities and businesses that are so close to our people feed this information back so that we can do the kind of strategic policy making on the foreign policy side that would lead to capacity building among the 3 Cs? We do not. So one thing that I give you today, I think we have to have disruptive dialogues and radical honesty. Because in questions of society and pluralism, of openness and togetherness, we need to understand where the fears are, whether they're perceived, and we know that the other disinformation has changed radically the way that we see truth, honesty, and shape our perceptions. So in addition to those couple of C's, radical creativity today, radical honesty, and I think challenge every premise and realize that, again, in order to manifest the kind of change that we need now, based on the failings and the hubris that we allowed to creep into our systems, it's going to take not only a whole of government approach, it's going to take a whole of society approach, and in that sense, all of you are the Übertragsriemen we need in this world. So, thanks very much. We're open to your questions. We have a little bit of time, and then, of course, we're going to start our conversations in earnest. Thoughts, questions? This is the one time where the Harvard rule won't be enforced, where your voice has to go up at the end and it has to be a question. This is also the time for your radical manifesto on disruption.
Not so much a question, more of a comment.
No, yes. This is the one time in my 30 years in this job that I will allow comments happily. I'm always happy to sit with silence. I think it's a really healthy way to do that.
Florian, do you want to come in and say anything more about the idea itself and the paper?
Yeah. Well, I think I just mainly encourage others to come in and comment. I mean, what we discussed previously, and I think what's really interesting is see how this concept of progressive security is already coming alive, kind of politically, not just in the conversations that we're having in stages, but obviously across Europe. And Jeremy, you hinted to it. You find examples in the paper. I mean, we reference quite heavily what's going on in the US with Bidenomics, which is obviously Cathryn talked a lot about FDR, a kind of copy version of it in a sense, and which tries to bring together the connection between domestic and foreign policy, bringing back jobs, bringing back investment in the industrial heartlands in the US, and trying to provide communities and regions with this sense of security. And obviously kind of going forwards, I mean, we talk quite a bit in the paper also, well, it comes quite naturally maybe to have a look at the UK at the moment, what's happening there with where Rachel Reeves, so the Shadow Chancellor, has been pushing for a concept called securonomics, so connecting these bits of material security, but also with, I think we cite David Lammy in the paper, so the Shadow Foreign Minister, with bringing forward a kind of realistic, pragmatic, progressive approach when it comes to foreign policy. So really bring these bits together on the paper, and I think it's worth kind of diving into these conversations also with all your different perspectives from different countries. So now we've got a few questions. Maybe we can hand the microphones. This mic's there as well.
Hello, I'm Ryan Wayne from the Tony Blair Institute. First of all, just to say, I thought that was an excellent analysis of the world that we're in, and it feels like the dial is shifting, and if that happens in this room, brilliant. So well done on that front. I was struck by Nigel Farage in the UK recently in a sort of lackadaisical way, sitting in front of a group of people, telling them that the reason why public services are on their knees in the UK, why education is broken, why the NHS is failing, is because of an explosion in population. And it struck me that is probably, it's not grounded in fact, but that is probably to some voters the most credible reason why the public services are failing. And Jeremy, you said that we need to get answers on what are the root causes of insecurity, and I agree. I've also think we've got to make a distinction too, that the right, both the centre-right and the populist right, including Farage, they are campaigning on the causes, and I don't think we've properly put a label around it. We need to do that, but I think we also need to make sure that we are strict on ourselves in terms of campaigning in solutions too. And I think this is where the progressive ecosystem has failed quite poorly, actually, that we don't have answers to these big challenges. We tend to go straight to the talking about the causes, and sometimes we borrow the language of the right and then go quite lazy on what the answers should be. And we mentioned today briefly technology, and we've said that was a threat, but actually we have to lean into the technological revolution, because that is where so many of the solutions to the challenges, yes, that have been caused by that, in part, lie today. I don't think we've yet fully embraced that as our raison d'etre, as the basis centre of what a sort of radical progressive manifesto could be that allows us to campaign in solutions.
Should we take a batch, Florian?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Let's have a couple more.
And one at the back.
Hi, I'm Max from the Federal Chancellery. So maybe not surprisingly, your framing kind of resonates with me. Maybe mainly in, you know, you talked about like an epidemic, and there is some kind of epidemic of pessimism among progressives in Germany at the moment, I would say. There's kind of this idea that we kind of tried reform and there's so much backfire and people don't really want it, so we better stop trying. And that's why I find it really, you know, like revitalizing and energizing that you allude to FDR, and it kind of, we've been in this situation before, it has been done before, and it's kind of the challenge at hand is as tough as it is at the moment, you know, and I think this is like a very positive frame in a way, and I think it helps us in a way to have the right kind of conversations in the next 2 days. And I really liked your questioning all the premises and radical honesty, because I think also on the side of the progressive, there's some kind of, you know, Lebenslügen, as you would say in Germany, and we have to really look ourselves into the eyes regarding these kind of Lebenslügen. Yeah.
Do we have another?
Yep. Just
yes.
Hi, Deborah Cole from The Guardian. Cathryn, I was thinking about what you were saying about, you know, the radical honesty that is going to be necessary if progressives are going to make any progress. I mean, we're heading into a UK election where, you know, Labour can expect a sort of thumping, you know, majority, and we'll have a window to make some ambitious changes to address the enormous problems. And in Germany here, we have, you know, a three-way coalition that there's the perception that it can really only offer the lowest common denominator. And I think going forward with the rise of smaller parties in Germany, you're going to, you know, keep having this fractured system that is going to create, you know, governments with smaller majorities and often three-way, you know, coalitions. That's going to make it very, very difficult here to really address, you know, some of the enormous problems here. So I was wondering if I think, you know, obviously Jeremy, you can also, you know, speak to that contrast as someone who knows Germany well.
Oh, we got one in the way back.
Thank you. Angarok, working on just transitions. I was just, you were talking a lot how we're failing citizens and societies, and I was wondering, in the spirit of radical honesty, who do you mean by we? Because I think we tend to make this broad tent, and I think it's important to specify that, and maybe also to refer to positive framing. Do we have some ideas, some leaders, communities, movements that are taking place now that you think are not failing people or are giving them hope? Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank God for an optimistic
question. One more in the middle,
just
just before we...
Okay.
Daria Ivleva, working at Delphi on climate topics. And I think what you said resonated with me a lot, because we went sort of from this years of complacency, or when I say we, in this sense, Germany and other European countries maybe, but specifically Germany, we went from complacency to crisis directly, right? So I was talking to people maybe 7 years ago, and they didn't want to listen to me when I was talking about climate because everything was fine. And now they don't want to listen to me because nothing is fine.
Right.
So either way, they're not interested. And so my question resonates actually with some of the remarks here. So what are, from your perspective, some of the entry points in terms of narratives and visions and positive things that you can give, or we all can give other people who are not yet convinced? So I'm not only worried about the pessimism a bit among progressives, but I'm also more worried about the pessimism amidst the people who we are trying to convince. And so how do you, if somebody went from complacency to crisis, how do you convince? And maybe you have some examples, because honestly, I have been failing in my conversations with people who are not already sort of on our side, in the climate boat or whatever you want to call it. I'd be really interested if you have some examples.
Okay, you want to start?
Okay, sure. Yes, I'll pick off a couple, and then please come in on whatever you'd like. I mean, to the point about migration, I mean, I did think about including it in my initial presentation, but I decided not to, because it seems to me it is fundamentally a symptom of the underlying causes that I spoke about. But communicating that fact and telling that story of migration as the symptom of an insecure world is a big comms and framing challenge in front of progressives. And I mean, I don't want to stand up here like some sort of all-seeing oracle. So that's a direction in which you could go. I'll say no more. Another direction in which you could go on the migration front is to look at things like sponsorship-led approaches. So this is something that's been pioneered in a number of countries, most notably Canada, where you work with communities to sponsor groups or individuals that can move and integrate and be welcomed, so that you actually sort of match supply with demand a bit better. So again, not sure if it's the answer, but it might be a good direction. On the point about drawing strength from times of adversity, there I think we can actually learn a lesson from the failures, at least in Europe, to learn the lessons of the Eurozone crisis. Unfortunately, we've had to, in more recent years, learn those lessons later than I think was absolutely necessary. So a good education in learning from crisis and taking the sort of urgency that comes when you have a crisis and using it for good. Deborah, on your question about Germany, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, I would particularly point here to that capacity pillar of progressive security, because Germany has such a low public investment rate. The debt brake is, as we're seeing in the negotiations now, such a limitation for a progressive project in Germany, that kind of making those sort of multifarious coalitions, particularly ones like the federal one dedicated to modernization, work. You need to sort of look at that. I think that's probably enough from me. Cathryn, do you want to come in?
Okay, so this is so interesting. The migration, or the demographic point, is such an interesting one, because you so rarely phrase that in an opportunity narrative. I mean, it became crystal clear, obviously, during Brexit. And I remember when I lived in the UK, I rented an apartment with a power shower, and I kept asking myself, what on earth is that? It turns out it's just a normal shower. Ha! But it's not one that I have to connect to the faucet first and have to do all sorts of things. And thank God Polish plumbers came over and fixed that problem for me and the rest of the UK. And I say this because, of course, when they left, quote unquote, in terms of Brexit, we didn't tell a story of progress in terms of border opening. And now we're at a phase, because, again, those are sort of opportunities that we missed in terms of people that we can bring into the society, really open questions about how much pluralism and how much difference can we sustain and can we maintain? Because that's really behind it, right? How much difference can we engage with? Because we know that engaging in difference is hard. It's also hard on an intergenerational front. It's hard all across the board. And acknowledging first and foremost that is difficult, right? Instead of saying, in the Heartlands piece or in our industrial transformation, where we're saying, oh, actually, you worked in the coal mines all your life. You know what? Be different. Right? You were here, and this was your community, and this was all you were used to. Actually, now be different. So we have to, part of the radical creativity part also starts with radical empathy and like sort of getting to the fact where the fear factor is, because of course these narratives will change over time. In the United States, you're now, from one presidential candidate hearing the Christian white narrative. Well, why is part of that, a way that people can claw onto that logic? Because now people are in the Christian white club who never were. The Italians, the Irish, the Catholics. When they arrived in the United States, they weren't white. They were different. Now they're in the club, and because power in demographic terms in the United States, because again, the Republican Party, unless you're manipulating the system and you're creating systemic change, they cannot win the country. Okay? That's what's going on. And that is what the program is behind, or the system, the strategy behind the Trump administration, because of how radically the country is changing. So the minute those kind of differences get obscured so that you're feeding a power narrative, that's when you have a cauldron of trouble. So part of what you need to, and this gets back to this point about who, the narrative thing is not unimportant, right? That's what separates us from monkeys. We need a story here. Who do we want to be? What do we want to be? And those are the chances that you now see in a UK campaign, and where that's been done well in previous American campaigns. It's harder, obviously, to do the minute you have a system that's designed for a multi-party infrastructure. Because then, as we're seeing now, halfway through the administration, everybody's already hedging for the next election. And so nobody's willing to get on board with a totally cohesive narrative because, I don't know, is that going to line up with the next folks I might have to partner with? That's much harder. But that is what, our voters are asking for. Where are we going? We're speculating that Rishi Sunak called the general election because it would fall in the middle of the Euro, and then maybe if, they do well enough, that would give us enough national cohesion. Those things are important. We know that those things are important, right? What are we for? What are we for as a country? What is Germany's role in the world? If you read any of the party manifestos that have come out more recently, totally unclear still. And I think that's kind of where we need to be moving. The question about party is who's the we? It's the party political elites. It's all of us that are part of that structure. And so when we go and try to convince people of seeing it our way, more often than not, we're not doing a good job of listening. We're not doing a good job of asking a lot of open-ended questions to figure out where it really hurts. And only from that point of departure can you build back up. We are all, and me included, so type A that our initial idea is to always go to the solution and then try to, what we perceive as the solution, and try to convince people that we're right. Because that has something to do with our self-image, right? And our capacity, and our role, and our power in society. All of these questions are linked by questions of power, individual and collective. And so this is where, that's what I meant. We need sort of a radical new approach to humility. Part of the reason why Obama, in his election campaign in 2008, brought all those people out to the Siegessäule, because part of the messaging was, I don't have it all figured out, but I have all of you. One big collective enterprise, right? And that's just in how you organize that. All of you have been in grassroots politics. All of you have been in grassroots campaigns. That is harder than anything. Nothing is harder than to work with humans. But I think that's the whole ask and task of this time. And not, again, to proselytize and to give people the wisdom. It is to be closer and to listen more and to listen better. So I would be the last person to give advice on how to convince people of one thing or another. You have to listen better. And we have to admit that we've gotten it wrong. This is something that's extremely different in political cultures. Americans are better at this, Anglo-Saxons are better at this, Germans are terrible at this, right? And so, but think about your interpersonal interactions. When you admit that you've made a mistake, when you admit that you've done things wrong, when you humble yourself, is that a different conversation right away or what? So I think that's part of what needs to be in that conversation, because the complexity, as Jeremy pointed out, is so rife. Everybody understands it's complex. That's why you saw voter participation in the European election tick up everywhere. People get that something is going on and they want to be a part of it, but they don't know what it means, and so they're freaked out, and so they're much more liable to give their vote to some place that's just going to, pretend to put an end to this, whatever this is. So that's an opportunity. That's a radical opportunity. So, it has to be our work has to be intergenerational. It has to be urban. It has to bring people into the conversation. I spent yesterday with businesses all over North Rhine-Westphalia who are engaged in the United States and who will tell you lots of different stories about what's going on in the US. Are we listening to all these different folks? We are perpetuating Einstein's idea of idiocy is where we keep going on in the same way. Our party structures, we're not breaking them apart, we're not letting other people in, and we expect different results. Well, I hate to tell you, they're not going to come. So it's the time to do the hard work and to get back into the game, or as FDR and others would say, to get back into the arena.
Very well said.
You can stay. Thank you very much for this very energetic introduction. Cathryn, Jeremy, Florian, thank you for setting the scene and teasing our taste for some more progressive policies. You can read the paper, and you can read Florian's op-ed in The Guardian that was published yesterday. And we invite you to engage in conversations. But before we continue with the program, I would like to share some practical information with you, which are as important as the policy dimension of our conversation, of our event. So first point is that, as you can see, we have an ambitious program with different sessions. Some sessions will be taking place here in the main stage. Others will be taking place somewhere else. There will be breakout sessions. The forum is here on the right side, and the boardroom is upstairs. I will be each time announcing which session takes place where. At the end of the session and at the beginning of the sessions, I will be also reminding you about it. So make sure where you're heading and where you want to go. Second, this part of the event is a closed one. We will be, however, opening for the midsummer reception at 7 p.m. to let some more people in, to invite the Berlin crowd. So we also use this opportunity to make some new contacts and mingle with Berlin policy and politics bubble. Third point, social media, of course. Please use the hashtag PGS24. You're free to tweet and post about what we are talking about. There's no Chatham House rule. Spread the progressive word. Housekeeping. Das Progressive Zentrum is committed to creating safe spaces. We want everybody to feel embraced and respected, and please follow this rule. Be kind, agree to disagree, wait for your turn. If you feel uncomfortable or if you see unexpected or unaccepted behavior, there is awareness team that can be immediately addressed. And if you have any other questions, you can just reach out to the team of Das Progressive Zentrum, and they will happily answer all your questions. Last but not least, please be punctual, because we would like to keep the schedule for the day. The day is long. Therefore, the more important that we are on time everywhere that we should be. Now we have a break till 11, and we continue with the first session block. And the first session block is the first round of breakout sessions. And here at the main stage, we will be talking about fostering innovation and social progress, the role of AI in strengthening European sovereignty. In the forum, technology question. In the forum, from anxiety to action, empowering the youth in the fight against the climate crisis and for democracy. That's a session co-designed with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And in the boardroom, it's a session by invitation only, in cooperation with the Bertelsmann Stiftung. And it's Change is in the Air, Shaping EU-UK Relations in the Post-Brexit Era. Very fascinating topics. Make your choice and see you back at 11. Thank you.